Welcome to the Clinical File with John Cordray.
I'm a licensed professional counselor, and this is my mental health analysis of the Kevin West case. These are my speculations. What kind of internal pressure builds inside someone who holds a position of public trust, someone entrusted with saving lives, until they reach the point of staging a loved one's death to clear the path for a new relationship? That question alone captures one of the most jarring elements in this story, because the behavior points toward a profound need for control, where long-term bonds can start to feel like barriers rather than sources of connection. People sometimes reach a place in life where unresolved emotional conflicts quietly erode their capacity for genuine empathy. And when that happens, relationships can shift from partnerships into obstacles that must be removed. In cases involving this kind of calculated deception, we frequently see early signs of emotional detachment, perhaps rooted in patterns that go back years, patterns that allow someone to compartmentalize harm from their public identity. Stay with me as I walk through the evidence step by step, because understanding how these psychological mechanisms operate can help us recognize similar patterns before they escalate into tragedy. The most recent development in this case came on January 20, 2026, when a jury in Clark County Superior Court returned guilty verdicts on both first-degree murder and second-degree murder charges against Kevin West and the death of his wife Marcella West. The most recent development in this case came on January 20th, 2026, when a jury in Clark County Superior Court returned guilty verdicts on both first-degree murder and second-degree murder against Kevin West in the death of his wife. The trial lasted 2 weeks and laid bare the details of his long-term affair, with written plans to leave the marriage and the forensic evidence that contradicted his account of the events. Sentencing is scheduled for February 27, 2026, and he now faces a sentence that could mean decades in prison, potentially up to life, depending on how the court structures the terms. Kevin West was 52 years old at the time of the verdict and had previously served as a battalion chief with the fire department in Washington State. He retired from that role before the trial began and was living on his pension. His wife, who went by Marcy, was 49 when she died on January 8, 2024. Early that morning, shortly after 4:30 a.m., Kevin West placed a 911 call reporting that Marcy was unconscious and appeared to be experiencing a seizure. First responders, including personnel from his own fire department, arrived quickly along with police, but despite efforts, she was pronounced dead at 5:11 a.m. At first, the death appeared to be a sudden medical emergency, and the initial examination did not immediately raise red flags. However, subsequent tips received by investigators prompted authorities to request a second autopsy. The Clark County Medical Examiner's Office ultimately determined the cause of death to be asphyxia due to blunt force trauma to the neck, specifically vascular strangulation. This examination revealed damage and bruising behind the ears, hemorrhaging between the skull and the scalp, brain swelling, and additional neck injuries consistent with sustained pressure. Those findings transformed the case from possible accident into a homicide investigation, and Kevin West was later arrested. From a psychological perspective, the decision to stage a scene as a medical event raises important questions about how someone manages internal conflict. What mental processes allow a person to perform CPR on someone that they have just harmed, as West claimed he did in his statements to police? In my clinical experience, this kind of behavior often aligns with compartmentalization, a defense mechanism in which incompatible thoughts or actions are kept strictly separated so that the guilt does not intrude on immediate decision-making. When compartmentalization is strong, individuals can appear calm and composed even in highly stressful situations because they have effectively walled off the part of themselves that knows the truth. Kevin and Marcy had been married for many years, but evidence presented at the trial showed that their relationship had been strained for some time. Investigators discovered that West had been involved in a long-term affair with Cynthia Ward, a relationship that began in the early 2000s and had grown increasingly serious. Text messages and handwritten letters recovered from the garage documented his intention to leave Marcy on January 8, 2024, the exact day she died, and to move forward with the divorce proceedings soon afterward. One of the letters expressed excitement about starting a new chapter with Ward and declared that 2024 would be their year. This level of premeditated planning suggests a motive centered on a desire for a fresh start. Yet the choice to escalate to violence rather than pursue legal separation is where the psychological picture becomes especially interesting. When someone feels entitled to remove the obstacle rather than navigate through its honest communication, that mindset frequently ties back to a narcissistic trait or deeply ingrained sense of entitlement. I'm speculating here, but based solely on the documented behaviors, this entitlement can make extreme actions feel justified in the moment because the individual prioritizes their own needs above everything else. The alibi West provided turned out to be less than airtight when measured against the physical evidence. He described an ordinary evening on January 7, 2024. The couple watched movies, ate takeout, and Marcy complained of a headache before taking ibuprofen and vomiting once. According to his account, she went to bed and had no further issues until he discovered her unresponsive the next morning. The defense argued during the trial that Marcy had a documented history of migraines, that she sometimes refused medical treatment, and that a massage administered by West's son the previous evening might have triggered the seizure. Prosecutors responded that no medical records supported a seizure disorder and that the pattern injuries pointed to unmistakably to strangulation. When someone constructs a narrative that conflicts so directly with forensic findings, it often reflects to a broader pattern of manipulation in which reality is reshaped to protect their self-image. The plan appeared to rely on an impressive level of optimism regarding forensic science, and that kind of overconfidence remains one more reliable predictors of eventual detection in these cases. People sometimes overestimate how invisible they become when they put on a familiar role, but the evidence trail rarely cooperates with that assumption. During the trial, which began on January 5, 2026, Cynthia Ward took the stand and confirmed the seriousness of the affair, as well as West's stated plans to leave his marriage. She and West became engaged after his arrest, a detail that further underscored the motive prosecutors emphasized. West himself testified on January 16, 2026, maintaining his innocence and describing his attempts to revive Marcy. Jurors listened to the 911 recording and reviewed his police interviews, where inconsistencies surfaced between his initial statements and the recovered digital communications. Repeated deception, even when mounting evidence makes the story harder to sustain, frequently signals to a fragile self-concept that cannot tolerate exposure. Admitting fault or vulnerability feels so threatening that the individual doubles down on the falsehoods rather than face the consequences. Digital footprint in this case was enthusiastic, well-preserved text and letters providing investigators with a clear roadmap of intent. Humans continue to demonstrate remarkable creativity when explaining away inconvenient evidence, yet the creativity rarely matches the thoroughness of modern forensic review. The Clark County Sheriff's Office took over the investigation to avoid any appearance of conflict, given West's long career working alongside first responders in the area. Tips about the affair ultimately led to the request of the second autopsy, and that external information became the turning point. Living with prolonged secrecy, such as ongoing affair while maintaining a public marriage, generates chronic stress that can erode judgment over time. In therapy settings, I've observed how sustained duplicity often amplifies anxiety until a breaking point arrives, and at that point, decisions can become impulsive, even when they appear calculated on the surface. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours before delivering guilty verdicts on both counts, each carrying a domestic violence aggravator. West will be sentenced only on the first-degree murder conviction, with a standard range of 20 to 26 years and the possibility of additional time. After the verdict was read, he embraced family members in the courtroom while some observers heckled him, reflecting a deep division the case created in the community. Family support remained consistent throughout the proceedings, which raises its own set of psychological questions. When loved ones continue to stand by someone despite compelling evidence, that loyalty can sometimes involve cognitive dissonance, where deeply held beliefs about a person clash with objective facts, and the discomfort is resolved by often rejecting the facts. This case illustrates the classic mismatch between perceived cleverness and actual detectability, because the evidence trail, texts, letters, forensic findings, and timeline alignment was far more straightforward than the defense narrative suggested. As someone who spends way too much time thinking about these cases, even I found the introduction of the massage theory as a late defense explanation surprising in its reach. Come on, the sun? The letters hidden in the garage, yet easily discoverable, carried powerful declarations of intent to start a new life. Preserving those documents while simultaneously planning harm suggests a degree of internal ambivalence, as though part of the mind remained torn between the two worlds he was trying to inhibit. The timing remains one of the most striking elements here. Marcy died on the precise day West had told Ward he would move out. That convergence is difficult to view as coincidence, and from a behavioral standpoint, it points to an escalation from fantasy into concrete action. What tips someone from a private resentment into an irreversible violence? Frequently, a final trigger, perhaps mounting pressure from the affair partner or fear that the marriage would not dissolve quietly, pushed the boundary. Many tragedies of this nature trace back to an avoided conversations that allow resentment to build unchecked until it finds its outlet. Marcy's reported migraines and occasional refusal of medical care were highlighted by the defense, yet those details did not alter the forensic conclusion. While health neglect can strain any long-term relationship, the leap to lethal violence places responsibility square on the perpetrator. Focusing on West's behavior, we see a pattern of seeking external validation and excitement outside the marriage rather than addressing underlying dissatisfaction through open dialogue. When communicating collapses and resentment festers, the risk of toxic outcome increases significantly. The 911 call captured a voice that sounded urgent, yet controlled, a composure that aligns with years of emergency training. Yet that same control can mask calculation when the individual has rehearsed responses in advance. Jurors eventually weighed those elements alongside the physical evidence and found the account unpersuasive. With sentencing approaching, the case serves as a sobering reminder of how professional facades can conceal private turmoil and how unchecked desires left unexamined can lead to devastating consequences. Here's a case where someone who used their authority, their training, and the help that they initially wanted to have for the community, presumably, he became a fireman for a reason to help people, maybe to gain power, but he used that training and the knowledge to commit this act. He remained calm and cool in a moment of crisis. He tried to manipulate the crime scene, and the forensic evidence pointed to him. And he was arrested, and now he's undergoing this trial. He's got a life ahead of him that's going to be locked up. So what did you think about this case? Were there any elements that stood out to you? Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.